A single act of kindness can change the destiny of an entire kingdom. A hated Omega saved 3 dying wolf pups, never knowing they were the Alpha King's lost princes. Welcome. We're delighted you're here with us today. If you enjoy this story, we'd love to have you join our growing story family, so please consider subscribing. Also, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's story. Winter arrived early in the Northern Territories that year, covering the ancient forests with thick blankets of white and silencing even the boldest wolves. The wind swept across Frost Hollow Pack with a mournful cry that seemed to carry every cruel word Evelyn Harper had ever heard. At 27, Evelyn had learned that some wounds never appeared on the skin. They lived quietly beneath polite smiles, inside lowered eyes, and in the careful way she stepped aside whenever others approached, as though she had apologized for existing long before anyone demanded it. The people of Frost Hollow believed she brought misfortune wherever she walked. Crops failed after she passed a field. Storms were blamed on her prayers. Even a hunter returning empty-handed could point toward the quiet Omega and find nods of agreement from the crowd. No one remembered when the whispers had started. They simply accepted them as truth because it was easier than questioning fear. That morning, the entire pack gathered beneath towering pine trees for the winter blessing, a tradition meant to celebrate unity before the harshest months settled over the mountains. Families stood together beneath fluttering banners while children laughed and chased one another through fresh snow. Evelyn stood alone near the back, wrapped in a faded gray cloak that had been carefully mended so many times the stitches formed their own quiet pattern. She kept her hands folded, hoping the ceremony would end before anyone noticed her. It never worked that way. When the elder announced that hunting trails had frozen sooner than expected, uneasy murmurs spread through the crowd. One voice blamed bad luck. Another whispered Evelyn's name. Within moments, the whispers became certainty, and certainty became accusation. No one shouted. No one threatened. Their disappointment hurt far more because it sounded calm, practiced, almost ordinary. The elder looked toward Evelyn with tired eyes and spoke gently enough that his words somehow cut even deeper. Perhaps the mountains ask us to travel lighter this winter. She understood what he meant before anyone stepped aside to clear a path. They wanted her gone. Evelyn lowered her head, not because she agreed, but because she had grown exhausted from defending herself against stories people preferred over truth. She offered a small nod, turned away from the only home she had ever known, and walked beyond the last wooden cabin without looking back. Snowflakes drifted across her face as daylight slowly faded behind thick gray clouds. The deeper she wandered into the forest, the quieter the world became. Only the steady crunch of boots over frozen ground reminded her she was still moving forward. She had no destination, no promise waiting beyond the endless trees. Only the stubborn belief that kindness still mattered even when no one rewarded it. Then, just as the wind settled into silence, a tiny cry floated through the woods. It was so faint she almost believed she had imagined it. She stopped. Another cry answered, weaker than the first, followed by a second, and then a third. Evelyn turned toward the sound, her heartbeat quickening as she pushed through snow-covered branches until she reached the base of an enormous fallen oak. Beneath its twisted roots, hidden from the storm by little more than luck, 3 impossibly small wolf pups lay curled together, trembling against the cold, their frightened golden eyes lifting toward the only person who had ever come when they called. The smallest of the 3 pups tried to stand the moment Evelyn knelt beside them, but its tiny legs trembled so badly that it slipped back into the snow with a quiet whimper. Her heart tightened as she carefully removed her gloves and reached out one slow hand, allowing the frightened little creatures to decide for themselves. Instead of pulling away, the weakest pup leaned into her palm, its fur icy beneath her fingertips but carrying the faint warmth of a life that refused to give up. The other 2 watched her with unusual caution. They were no ordinary wild pups. Even exhausted and hungry, there was an alertness in their bright golden eyes that reminded her of seasoned wolves rather than newborns. One instinctively shifted closer to shield the smallest, while another remained facing the forest as though standing guard. Evelyn whispered softly, her voice barely louder than the wind. "You are safe now. I promise." The words disappeared into the cold air, yet all three pups slowly relaxed. She unfastened the worn wool scarf around her neck and gently wrapped it around their tiny bodies before lifting them into her arms. They were surprisingly light, far lighter than healthy wolf pups should have been. She could feel every shallow breath against her coat as she turned toward the only shelter she knew, an abandoned trapping cabin nearly 2 miles deeper into the forest. Snow continued to fall, growing heavier with every passing minute. The journey felt endless. More than once Evelyn stumbled over hidden roots beneath the drifting snow, but each time she tightened her embrace to keep the pups warm before catching her balance again. The smallest one buried its nose beneath her chin, and she could not help smiling despite everything that had happened that morning. No one had held her with such trust in many years. By the time the weathered cabin finally appeared between towering pines, daylight had almost disappeared. The little structure leaned slightly with age, and the roof carried a thick blanket of snow, but it still offered protection from the bitter wind. Evelyn pushed open the creaking door, brushed frost from an old stone fireplace, and carefully gathered dry branches stored beneath the porch. Soon a gentle fire crackled across the room, filling the air with welcome warmth. She laid the pups on folded blankets near the hearth and searched the small shelves until she found an old iron pot. Melting clean snow over the fire, she added dried herbs she had collected during autumn and mixed them with goat's milk she had carried from the village before her exile. Patiently, she fed each pup a few careful drops at a time. None of them snapped or growled. Instead, they watched her with quiet curiosity, as though trying to understand why a stranger would choose kindness without expecting anything in return. Hours passed peacefully. The smallest pup finally drifted into deep sleep, its breathing slow and steady. Another rested beside the fire, while the largest remained awake, sitting near the doorway with surprising dignity, occasionally glancing outside before looking back toward Evelyn. She noticed a strange marking beneath the thick silver fur on its front paw, a crescent-shaped birthmark unlike anything she had ever seen among the wolves of Frost Hollow. It almost looked deliberate, as though nature itself had left a signature. Evelyn quietly dismissed the thought with a gentle smile. They were only frightened little pups who needed warmth, food, and someone willing to stay beside them through the longest night of their young lives. She had no way of knowing that far beyond the frozen mountains, an entire kingdom had spent months searching for those very 3 lives, and that before another sunrise arrived, destiny had already begun following their tiny tracks through the snow. Morning arrived beneath a pale gray sky, and for the first time in many months, Evelyn Harper woke to something other than silence. 3 tiny heartbeats echoed softly through the little cabin as the wolf pups stretched beside the fading fire. The smallest yawned and stumbled toward her lap without hesitation, while the second eagerly sniffed the wooden floor as though mapping every corner of its new shelter. The largest remained near the doorway, quietly watching the forest beyond the frosted window with calm, intelligent eyes that seemed far older than its size should have allowed. Evelyn smiled as she added another piece of firewood to the flames. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to care for someone instead of simply surviving another lonely day. She divided the last of her food into 4 equal portions without thinking twice. The meal was modest, but each pup wagged its small tail with such genuine gratitude that her empty stomach hardly mattered. As the morning passed, she stepped outside carrying a woven basket, hoping to gather herbs buried beneath the snow and perhaps find a frozen stream where fish might still be trapped beneath the ice. Before she had gone more than 20 yards, the 3 pups followed behind her in a neat little line. She laughed softly. "You should stay inside where it is warm." None of them listened. The smallest carefully stepped in the larger tracks she left behind, while the second repeatedly wandered off to inspect every pine cone and fallen branch before racing back again. The largest never drifted more than a few feet away, quietly watching every movement around them. It was almost as if the little wolf considered protecting her to be its most important duty. By late afternoon, thin columns of smoke rising from the old cabin caught the attention of hunters returning from Frost Hollow. Hidden behind snow-covered evergreens, they spotted the 3 unfamiliar wolf pups playing near the doorway while Evelyn prepared bundles of herbs. One hunter narrowed his eyes. "Rogue wolves," he muttered. Another shook his head. "Not ordinary ones. Look at their silver coats." Within minutes, the men hurried back toward the village carrying stories that grew larger with every retelling. By sunset, the entire pack believed the hated Omega had welcomed dangerous predators into the forest. Curiosity quickly turned into fear, and fear became certainty. A meeting was called before darkness settled over the valley. The elder listened as one hunter insisted the wolves would eventually threaten nearby settlements. Another argued they should be removed before they matured. Although no one had actually seen the pups behave aggressively, rumors traveled faster than truth ever could. Before long, a small group volunteered to visit the abandoned cabin the following morning. They claimed they wanted only to investigate, but every conversation centered on separating the strange wolves from the woman protecting them. Deep inside the forest, unaware of the growing concern, Evelyn gently brushed snow from the smallest pup's fur as all three settled close beside the fireplace. Outside, heavy flakes drifted quietly through the frozen pines. Inside, warmth, trust, and simple kindness filled the tiny cabin. None of them realized that by sunrise visitors would arrive carrying suspicion instead of compassion, and that the little family formed by chance would soon face its very first test together. The knock came just after sunrise, firm enough to startle the birds from the snow-covered branches outside the cabin. Before Evelyn Harper could reach the door, the largest pup quietly stepped in front of her, planting its tiny paws with surprising confidence. She gently smiled and rested a hand on its soft silver fur. "It is all right," she whispered. "You do not have to protect me." The little wolf looked up at her as though weighing every word before reluctantly moving aside. When Evelyn opened the weathered wooden door, 6 members of Frost Hollow Pack stood waiting beneath the falling snow. Their expressions were guarded, not openly hostile, but shaped by fear that had been repeated often enough to feel like fact. The eldest hunter removed his gloves and spoke first. "We heard you were sheltering rogue wolves." Evelyn glanced back toward the fire where the other 2 pups were curiously watching from inside. "They are only frightened children," she answered softly. "They were freezing when I found them." A younger hunter shook his head. "Wild wolves grow into dangerous wolves. They cannot stay here." Evelyn remained calm despite the familiar weight of judgment settling over her shoulders. "Have they harmed anyone?" Silence answered her question. "Have they threatened your homes?" Again, no one spoke. She continued gently. "Then please allow them time to recover. When spring comes, if they choose the forest, I will not stop them. But I cannot abandon them while they still depend on someone." The hunters exchanged uncertain glances. Their confidence weakened beneath the quiet certainty in her voice. Suddenly, the smallest pup toddled toward the doorway carrying a tiny pine cone in its mouth. Instead of growling at the strangers, it happily placed the pine cone at the boots of the oldest hunter before sitting down with an eager wag of its tail. The unexpected gesture caught everyone by surprise. The old hunter slowly bent down, picked up the pine cone, and stared at the tiny creature. "That is unusual," he murmured. Before anyone could respond, the second pup darted toward a nearby stack of split firewood. It carefully nudged one loose log that had begun sliding toward Evelyn's feet, stopping it before it could fall. The largest pup remained beside her, constantly scanning the tree line with quiet discipline that seemed impossible for one so young. None of them behaved like frightened wild animals. They acted more like children raised with patience, intelligence, and remarkable self-control. Even so, fear rarely surrendered to reason. One hunter finally sighed. "Whether they seem gentle or not, the council will not ignore this. They will come themselves next time." Evelyn nodded. She had expected nothing less. "Then I will tell them exactly what I have told you." The visitors slowly departed, disappearing between towering pines until only their fading footprints remained in the fresh snow. As silence returned, Evelyn closed the cabin door and leaned against it for a long moment. She knew the pack had not been convinced. Trouble had merely been delayed. Behind her, the 3 pups gathered around as though sensing the worry she tried to hide. The smallest gently rested its head against her boot. The second curled beside the fireplace. The largest looked directly into her eyes before quietly pressing one tiny paw into her hand. For an instant, a faint silver warmth spread across her palm, gentle as moonlight reflected on fresh snow. The strange sensation vanished almost immediately, leaving only quiet wonder behind. Evelyn looked at the little wolf in surprise. unaware that the mysterious bond growing between them was beginning to awaken something far older than memory and far greater than either of them could yet understand. Hundreds of miles north of the quiet cabin, where towering mountains touched clouds that never seemed to move, the royal fortress stood wrapped in winter sunlight like an ancient guardian watching over the kingdom. Inside its great stone walls, however, there was no peace. Every hallway carried the weight of unanswered questions. Every servant spoke in hushed voices, and every guard understood that the heart of the kingdom had been missing for months. King Cale Ashthorn stood alone before a massive window overlooking endless snow-covered forests. At 39, he possessed the quiet strength that had united rival packs and protected the northern territories through years of hardship. His broad shoulders remained perfectly still, yet everyone around him sensed the burden he carried. Power had never been the greatest measure of a king. For Cale, it was the emptiness left by 3 missing sons that tested him every single day. On the polished oak table behind him rested 3 small wooden carvings, shaped like wolves. They had been gifts from the princes during happier winters, carefully carved with uneven little paws and crooked ears that no craftsman would have dared correct. Cale reached for the smallest carving and held it in silence. "Where are you?" he whispered, not expecting an answer. A respectful knock interrupted the quiet room. Commander Rowan Mercer entered, removing his heavy cloak before bowing. His face revealed both exhaustion and determination. "Your Majesty, our search teams have returned from the western valleys." Cale turned immediately. "Did they find anything?" Rowan hesitated only long enough to reveal the truth. "No confirmed sightings. But yesterday morning, one of our northern scouts discovered fresh tracks unlike any we have seen before." The king's expression sharpened. "Show me." Rowan carefully unrolled a detailed map across the table. Several marked trails crossed rivers and frozen forests before ending near a forgotten stretch of woodland bordering smaller packs. 3 sets of juvenile wolf tracks, Rowan explained. They disappeared after a snowstorm, but our scouts also found signs that someone had been carrying them. The stride was human, a single traveler. Cale studied every line without speaking. Could it have been a hunter? Rowan slowly shook his head. Unlikely. Whoever carried them moved carefully and stopped several times, possibly to protect them from the weather. Silence filled the room once again. Hope was dangerous after so many disappointments, yet something about the report felt different. Cale closed his eyes for a brief moment, remembering the night the princes had vanished during a violent blizzard while traveling under heavy escort. No one had ever discovered what separated the young heirs from the royal convoy. Only one truth remained. They had never been found. Until now, perhaps. The king opened his eyes with quiet resolve. "Prepare my horse." Rowan looked surprised. "Your Majesty, we can send another search party." Cale shook his head. "Not this time. If there is even the smallest chance those tracks belong to my sons, I will follow them myself." Within the hour, royal messengers rode toward every outpost across the northern territories carrying new orders. Search every forest. Question every village. Leave no trail unexplored. Far away, hidden beneath towering pines, Evelyn laughed softly as the smallest silver pup chased falling snowflakes outside the little cabin, completely unaware that the most powerful alpha king in the kingdom had just begun riding toward the very place where destiny had quietly been waiting for them all. The first sign that someone was approaching did not come from the sound of horses or the crunch of boots across fresh snow. It came from the largest silver pup. While the other 2 chased one another around the cabin with playful excitement, the eldest suddenly became perfectly still. Its ears lifted toward the distant forest, and its golden eyes focused on something far beyond Evelyn Harper's hearing. She looked up from the basket of dried herbs she had been sorting. "What is it?" she asked softly. The little wolf did not answer with a growl or a bark. Instead, it quietly walked to her side and gently leaned against her leg. Moments later, the second pup stopped playing as well. Even the smallest one, usually fascinated by every drifting snowflake, hurried back toward the porch and sat close beside Evelyn. Their unusual behavior wrapped the peaceful afternoon in quiet uncertainty. Then, carried by the cold wind, came the faint rhythm of horses traveling through the trees. Evelyn stepped outside and shaded her eyes against the bright snow. Before long, 6 riders emerged between the towering pines. Unlike the hunters from Frost Hollow, these strangers wore dark blue cloaks fastened with silver clasps shaped like crescent moons. Their horses were larger, their movements disciplined, and every rider carried himself with calm confidence rather than fear. The man leading them raised one gloved hand as the group slowed to a respectful stop several yards from the cabin. "Good afternoon," he called warmly. "We are travelers searching for something precious that was lost during the winter." Evelyn offered a cautious nod. "There is little here besides an old cabin." The leader introduced himself simply as Captain Rowan Mercer, choosing not to reveal his royal rank. His eyes quietly surveyed the clearing until they settled on the 3 silver pups standing beside Evelyn. Time itself seemed to pause. Rowan had studied the royal heirs since the day they were born. Although months had passed and the pups had grown, certain details could never be mistaken. The oldest carried the distinctive crescent marking beneath its front paw. The second possessed unusually bright silver fur along its shoulders. The smallest tilted its head with the exact curious expression that had often made the palace staff smile. Rowan felt his breath catch, but years of discipline prevented any outward reaction. He slowly stepped from his horse and knelt in the snow instead of moving closer. "Beautiful little wolves," he said gently. "May I ask where you found them?" Evelyn hesitated before answering honestly. "They were alone beneath a fallen oak after the storm. They were weak and freezing. I could not leave them there." Rowan listened carefully, every word strengthening the hope he had tried not to embrace. One of his companions subtly noticed a finely woven blue ribbon tied beneath the smallest pup's neck. Evelyn smiled when she saw the soldier looking at it. "It was beginning to fray, so I replaced the old string with something softer." The soldier lowered his eyes, recognizing the ribbon at once. It had once decorated the blanket prepared for the youngest prince inside the royal palace nursery. Rowan quietly signaled his companions to remain calm. This was no ordinary discovery. It was the miracle the kingdom had prayed for through countless sleepless nights. Yet before any explanation could be offered, the largest pup calmly walked past every armored rider without hesitation and returned to stand beside Evelyn, pressing close against her as though making its choice unmistakably clear. Rowan watched the quiet moment with deep respect. Whoever this gentle young woman truly was, the 3 heirs trusted her completely, and he knew the news he carried back to King Cale Ashthorne would change far more than the fate of a kingdom. Rowan Mercer did not waste another moment. After offering Evelyn Harper a respectful bow, he quietly asked whether he and his men could return the following morning with someone who desperately needed to see the 3 silver pups. Evelyn searched his face, finding neither fear nor deception there. Only a hope so carefully restrained that it almost broke her heart. She nodded. "If your visitor comes in peace, my door will remain open." Rowan thanked her sincerely before mounting his horse. As the riders disappeared into the snowy forest, he urged his company forward with new purpose. Every mile carried the greatest news the Northern Kingdom had received in months. Before dawn the following day, King Cale Ashthorne arrived at the edge of the forest with only Rowan and 2 trusted royal guards. The king had chosen to leave the larger escort behind, unwilling to frighten the young wolves if Rowan's suspicions proved true. Fresh snow covered the narrow trail leading toward the old cabin, but another set of tracks caught Cale's attention. 3 tiny paw prints surrounded a single pair of human footprints, never straying far from one another. Rowan quietly smiled. They stay close to her wherever she goes. Cale lowered his gaze for a long moment. Then she has already given them something no army could. As they approached the clearing, laughter drifted through the cold morning air. It was gentle, warm, and completely unexpected. Cale stepped between the pines and stopped. There, beneath the soft winter sunlight, Evelyn knelt in the snow shaping 3 small snowballs while the silver pups eagerly chased them across the clearing. For the first time since his sons had disappeared, he saw them playing without fear. His breath caught in his chest. The smallest pup suddenly paused, lifted its head, and stared toward the trees. A heartbeat later it raced forward with surprising speed. Cale instinctively opened his arms, believing the little one had recognized its father at last. Instead, the tiny wolf ran past him, circled happily around Evelyn after she walked closer, and pressed against her boots with complete trust. The other 2 quickly followed, gathering around her until all 3 stood at her side. No command had called them. No instinct of rank had drawn them toward the Alpha King. They had chosen the woman who had rescued them when no one else had come. Kale remained perfectly still. There was no disappointment in his eyes, only profound gratitude. He understood immediately what that choice meant. These young lives had survived because of her compassion, not because of his title. Evelyn looked toward the strangers with quiet uncertainty, then offered a respectful greeting. "Good morning." Rowan stepped forward first. "Miss Harper, thank you for allowing us to return." Then he turned toward the tall man beside him. "There is someone I wish to introduce." Before Rowan could continue, the largest pup slowly walked away from Evelyn. Kale watched every careful step, hardly daring to breathe. The little wolf stopped only a few feet in front of the king, looked into his eyes for several silent seconds, and gently touched its nose against the back of Kale's hand. A warm silver glow shimmered briefly beneath its tiny paw, matching the faint mark Evelyn had seen the day before. Tears gathered in the eyes of even the seasoned royal guards. Rowan quietly lowered his head. "Your Majesty," he whispered, "your sons have finally been found." Evelyn's eyes widened in stunned silence as she looked from the 3 silver pups to the man standing before her, suddenly realizing that the quiet stranger with kind gray eyes was not simply another traveler. He was the Alpha King of the Northern Kingdom, and the 3 little wolves who had filled her lonely cabin with laughter were the lost princes every pack had been searching for. News traveled through Frost Hollow Pack faster than the winter wind. Before the sun reached its highest point, every family had gathered in the village square, whispering about the royal banners that now stood at the entrance to their settlement. No one could understand why the Alpha King himself had come to such a forgotten corner of the kingdom. Some believed a treaty was about to be announced. Others feared an ancient law had been broken. Not one of them imagined the truth was quietly walking toward them along the snow-covered path. Evelyn Harper entered the village with hesitant steps, wrapped in the same faded gray cloak she had worn on the day she was sent away. Beside her walked King Cale Ashthorne, calm and dignified, while Commander Rowan Mercer followed a respectful distance behind. The 3 silver pups trotted happily around Evelyn's feet, refusing to leave her side for even a moment. Their playful energy drew curious smiles from the younger children, but the adults stared in silent confusion. The elder who had once asked Evelyn to leave stepped forward and bowed deeply before the Alpha King. "Your Majesty, Frost Hollow welcomes you." Cale acknowledged the greeting with a polite nod, but his eyes remained on Evelyn. The village noticed the gesture immediately. An uneasy silence settled across the square. Finally, the elder spoke again. "May we ask what honor has brought the ruler of the Northern Kingdom to our humble home?" Cale answered in a steady voice that carried across every corner of the gathering. "I came to thank the woman who saved my sons." The words seemed to stop time itself. Faces filled with disbelief turned toward Evelyn. Several villagers exchanged uncertain glances, convinced they must have misunderstood. The Alpha King continued without raising his voice. "Months ago, my 3 sons disappeared during a terrible winter storm. Search parties crossed mountains, rivers, and forests, but none could find them. When hope was nearly gone, this young woman found them alone, hungry, and freezing beneath a fallen tree. She gave them shelter. She shared her food. She protected them without knowing who they were and without asking for anything in return." As though understanding every word, the 3 silver pups ran directly to Evelyn once again. The smallest leaned happily against her leg, the second sat at her feet, and the eldest gently rested its head in her hand. Their quiet affection spoke more clearly than any royal proclamation ever could. The elder lowered his eyes, remembering the day he had asked Evelyn to leave the pack. Several hunters who had doubted her kindness now stood frozen with regret. No one could deny what they were witnessing. The future heirs of the kingdom had chosen to remain beside the woman they had once called a burden. King Cale stepped closer to Evelyn and bowed his head before her with sincere respect. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Never in living memory had the Alpha King publicly honored an ordinary Omega in such a way. "Miss Harper," he said warmly, "the kingdom owes you a debt that cannot be measured in gold or titles. You preserved the lives of those I love most. For that, you will always have my gratitude." Evelyn's eyes filled with quiet emotion, but she simply smiled at the 3 little princes gathered around her. "I only did what anyone should do," she answered softly. Kale looked around the silent village before speaking one final truth. Kindness is never ordinary. It is the rarest form of courage. And today, every person here has witnessed where true greatness is found. No one spoke after that, because deep within every heart, they knew the woman they had once overlooked had become the brightest example of honor they would ever remember. The journey to the royal fortress began beneath a clear winter sky, but it no longer felt like the lonely walk that had carried Evelyn Harper away from Frost Hollow only days before. This time she traveled beside King Cale Ashthorn, while the three young princes remained close to her every step of the way. Whenever the royal carriage paused to rest, the smallest prince hurried toward Evelyn first, eager for her gentle smile. The second proudly brought her little treasures it discovered along the snowy trails, from smooth stones to pine cones shaped like tiny stars. The eldest stayed watchfully nearby, its calm golden eyes never wandering far from the woman who had become the safest place it had ever known. As the great gates of the royal fortress slowly opened, servants, advisors, and guards gathered in respectful silence. Many had spent endless nights praying for the return of the young heirs, and now tears of joy quietly appeared as the three silver pups crossed the courtyard together. Yet another sight captured everyone's attention just as deeply. The princes did not run ahead toward the palace. Instead, they waited patiently for Evelyn before continuing, as though reminding the entire kingdom who had carried them through their darkest days. Inside the grand hall, warm sunlight poured through tall windows, filling the room with a gentle glow. King Cale turned toward Evelyn with sincere gratitude reflected in his steady gray eyes. "There are moments when a ruler has the privilege of rewarding great service," he said quietly. "This is not one of those moments. No reward could equal what you have given my family. Today I simply wish to honor the truth." He invited her to stand beside him before the gathered court rather than below the royal platform. The gesture surprised every noble in attendance. "Let it be known throughout every pack," Cale declared, "that compassion is the greatest strength our kingdom possesses." Evelyn Harper reminded us that true nobility is revealed not by birth, but by the choices we make when no one is watching. The hall echoed with respectful applause, not because anyone had been ordered to celebrate, but because every heart recognized the honesty in his words. Over the weeks that followed, Evelyn chose not to seek wealth or influence. She asked only that forgotten villages receive more food during difficult winters and that abandoned children, whether wolf or human, would always find shelter within the kingdom. King Cale granted every request without hesitation. Together they established places of warmth and care throughout the northern territories, ensuring that no frightened child would ever face another winter alone. Frost Hollow Pact changed as well. Its people no longer measured worth through rumors or fear. They remembered the quiet Omega they had once overlooked and the lesson her kindness had written across an entire kingdom. Seasons passed, and the three young princes grew stronger each day, but one tradition never changed. Whenever they returned from their lessons or adventures, they always searched first for the woman whose gentle heart had become part of their own story. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or dazzling displays of power. Sometimes they begin with one person who refuses to walk past another soul in need. Long after that winter faded into memory, parents across the northern kingdom still shared the story of the lonely Omega who chose compassion over bitterness. And children smiled whenever they heard how three little princes found their way home, because one forgotten woman believed every life deserved to be loved. And beneath every full moon that shone over the peaceful forests, the kingdom remembered a truth that would never grow old. True strength is always gentle, and love has a remarkable way of leading even the lost safely home.